Hello, it's just me again with my weekly message and just something I've been thinking about this week. A few months ago, well before lockdown, we went to a talk, I think it was Dinner with Synod, and somebody was talking about vocations, about attracting people to ministry, and the fact that actually the demographics of ministry are sometimes not representative of the population of the nation. And this has been in the news recently. And the person speaking said, we've got the gender balance right now. We've got about half and half men and women going through training for ministry, but we're still unrepresented in other ways. And so what we need is a kind of ordinands who generally are more from the BAME communities, Black and Asian minority ethnic communities. We need them to be slightly younger and from slightly less academic backgrounds. So I sat there as a sort of older, white, fairly academic chap thinking, well, cheers, thanks very much. But then I thought, well, actually, in a sense, it's right. The demographics of the clergy ought to represent the nation that it serves. So, it ought to have the right proportion of men and women, black and white, etc., etc. And obviously, I've been thinking about this a bit more because of Black Lives Matter, and that's particularly touched the church as well, with, again, that question of where are the leaders in our church coming from. But I've also been thinking about it in terms of COVID-19 and the experience of people in lockdown. And there was a sort of movement a while ago which was sort of called Check My Privilege, which was, I think, quite a good idea that, when we speak, particularly when we kind of speak semi-public, social media, etc., we need to sort of check whether we're in a privileged position and that the people we're talking to might not actually be in that position. And this just isn't a secular concern. It's exactly what Jesus talks about. And when Jesus says, it's all very well for you sometimes, sort of wealthy and rich people, but, you put burdens on other people's backs about sort of the minor parts of the law, but actually the big weight on them, which might be sort of poverty or disease or whatever, you do nothing to help with. So I think those words of Jesus are exactly about this sort of issue. I think the trouble about privilege is that immediately, a bit like me in that room, it can kind of make you feel bad or guilty. And it seems to me very privilege is something you shouldn't feel at all guilty or bad about, as long as you've kind of got it honestly. For a start, some of it you can't help. I can't help being male. I can't help being white. So tough. If that's a problem for anybody, there's nothing I can do about it. And there are other senses in which, I've got a privilege of a good education, but we don't want to start saying, well, education's bad. Let's give people worse educations. No, it's great. I've got a reasonably good education. I hope I made the most of it. And, all we want is for that to be available for everybody, to have those sort of opportunities that I and perhaps most of you had, particularly when you look at these things worldwide. I think one of the things I've thought about then, as I say, since then, is about particularly sort of Black Lives Matter has put this into a context, but also actually about sort of coronavirus. And now, obviously, the thing about a pandemic, in a sense, is that it's indiscriminate. Just because you're white or wealthy or male or whatever, it doesn't seem to make any difference. The virus is equally virulent. But of course, when it comes to some of the measures and the sort of the restrictions, of course, actually, it does sort of matter where you are in life. And again, it's not something in a sense I can do anything about, but you know, it is a very different experience, the different sorts of lockdowns and restrictions that we've sort of lived through. And I think we just need to be wary of that. I mean, the classic case was, of course, when, and again, he couldn't help it. Prince Charles got it and sort of, he locked himself down in his sort of, several hundred-acre country estate. Um, but I think that highlights that actually, I mean, I'm pretty close to the Prince Charles experience, really. I live in a detached house. I have a garden. I have my own outside space, which is quite nice. I have a dog and a bicycle that's given me exercise all the way through. I've had a job which is both fairly secure for the moment, but also not one that I've needed to go out every day. And I realise it's been, to be honest, pretty good, pretty easy. I can't sort of get away from that, and I do think when I sort of read about what people are saying and stuff, that actually other people have had very different experiences. Um, so I'm thinking particularly of the fact that as the economy has sort of shrunk and people have sort of stopped working, of course, those who've kept working, not only in the health and caring sector, but also in other sectors, are often, frankly, not terribly well paid. Delivery drivers, supermarket workers, etc., etc. Now that's by no means universally true. I mean, there's been sort of very well paid doctors who've nonetheless made sort of heroic efforts. That's absolutely understood. But it does seem there's a lot of the sort of the vital services, the day-to-day stuff. I think it's highlighted that it is done by quite low-paid workers who've needed to carry on working. Posters delivering their round, etc. And then also, of course, there is the sort of difference of environments. I mean, in the countryside, as saying, a detached house with a garden, it's very, very different, I guess, from being in a flat on in a tower block. Perhaps you've got two children, you're a single mum, the children haven't been able to go to school, etc., etc., or you're living in a block of flats and you're the delivery driver who has to walk through the communal areas 2 or 3 times a day to sort of make deliveries to everybody else. Very different experience from what I have. And again, of course, some of those are just pure fate, pure chance. It may well be that I was a millionaire a couple of years ago and I was deciding, should I buy a penthouse in London or a nice house in the country? And of course, at the time, I wouldn't have been thinking, well, if a pandemic comes along, I'll be much better in the detached house in the country. So a lot of it is just chance. But as I say, in all these areas, and coronavirus has made me think about this more. This is the question of each of us have things where we're lucky, we're privileged, maybe something we've earned, maybe something that we can't help. It may be something that's just good, and any sane person would aim to have it. But at the other time, particularly when we're expressing views about other people, and this is what Jesus is really talking about, is just say, but what would it be like to be in a different situation? What would it be like to be that sort of delivery driver on the 28th floor of a tower block? So I think that's what I want to think about, that question of check your privilege without sort of guilt or anything else, but just thinking about sort of when we think about some of the things we thought about coronavirus, as I say, the sort of Black Lives Matter movement, and just think about those words of Jesus when he tells us, when you're thinking about behavior, about the law, etc., make sure you're not expressing views that might put burdens on other people's backs that actually you don't have to carry because of your privilege. So perhaps a rather sobering thought there, but I think one that just has been on my mind and hopefully might make us think a bit. Thank you.